why are we mandating fluoridating water? Not that I'm necessarily taking a position at that point on whether we should do it or not, but it doesn't have to be a state mandate. Only 13 states mandate it. So I put a bill in to the effect of eliminating the mandate, because I like to eliminate mandates. And I was amazed at the response I got from the dental community, basically, which is, if you don't back away from that position, we're going to tell people that you're crazy. And I thought, that takes you back, but at a certain point I thought that's a terrible way of dealing with things. And I said, listen, the bill's not going anywhere, but when the session is over, let me sponsor a little informational forum. And I'll invite somebody to come in to talk about the problems with fluoridation. You can come in and talk about the case for fluoridation. And they said, yes, absolutely. They were all on board until they found out the man who was coming in was Professor Connett. And after that, they sought one excuse after another not to participate, and in the end didn't participate. And when I heard the professor's presentation, I understood why they didn't participate, because he knows what he's talking about, and the only way you can respond is by responding with real facts. And that's what you're going to hear, I believe, for the next 45 minutes or half an hour, or however long the professor wants to take, is some very convincing facts, which I would still love to hear responded to fact by fact. And I would still invite somebody, and I would happily give people a forum to come in and respond to what he has to say. But I'd like a real response and not a list of organizations that don't agree with him. So that's an introduction enough. Professor Connett, go to it.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Joe. And reminds me of my Latin teacher at school. When I was 12 years of age, he told the class, he says that the best definition of an educated person is someone who can entertain himself or herself, entertain a friend, and entertain a new idea. And with that, Joe sort of epitomizes to me that person that's willing to entertain a new idea, who retains throughout their lives that open mind, which is so critical. And if you like that definition, and I do very much, what it tells you is there's many people teaching at universities who are not educated because they haven't got that open mind. And on this issue, there are many people in our professional bodies, in our health departments, who are not educated because they haven't retained that open mind. They're not willing to confront new ideas or new approaches or a review of existing ideas. And I have more to say about that when I have a quote from Henrik Ibsen shortly. Just to add to what Joe said last time, yes, he tried to organize a forum. Yes, I agreed immediately to come and present our case. And I think a day before, the other side refused to participate. But I went ahead and gave my presentation. That's the beginning of the story. The next day, in your big newspapers, I'm attacked. I'm attacked by those people that didn't have the guts or wherewithal to come and actually discuss or debate this issue in person. But I'm attacked by these people. And then when I responded, I sent a letter correcting some of the mistakes made by them in the article. My letter was not published. So just a few people in this town, in this state, actually heard the news. And the other side managed to get the coverage and continue this mythology. It's not very healthy for democracy. I probably disagree with the politics of Joe on many fronts, I hope so. But I do respect him for the way he goes about things, the openness with which he's doing it, and I think we're going to find more agreement, more coming together from different parts of the spectrum. If we were to, we have a rule with the Fluoride Action Network, you don't talk about politics, because the moment you talk about politics, we're split down the middle, because we have people from the right, people from the left. And quite frankly, toxic substances have no observance of what your politics are, or what the politics of the family is, or whether you're going to poison your children. This is not a political issue. It's only political in the sense of trying to stop something stupid from happening. Okay, enough of that. So, I've spent 28 years of my life fighting incineration and promoting more sustainable ways of handling waste. That's my background. That's taken me to 49 states in the US, 7 provinces in Canada, and 60 other countries. This is by way of, and this resulted last year in the publication of this book, The Zero Waste Solution, and I'm happy to say that Jeremy Irons, who hosted this wonderful movie Trashed, wrote the introduction to this book. Now I say all that just to give you the context that when my wife 18 years ago asked me to look at this issue as a professor of chemistry, she put a bunch of papers on my desk. I said, take them. I said, what is it? She said, fluoridation. I said, take those away. These people are crazy. They're flat earth society. You know, I had fallen for the paradigm. The paradigm is that the people in the white coats, all the authorities say that fluoridation is safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, and the people opposed to it are Looney Tunes. That is the paradigm which has worked. It's been working for 60 years. But of course, the shock was when I did start to read it. But the point is, because I was busy every weekend, every holiday, every term break, I was traveling somewhere to help communities stop incinerators. We stopped over 300, incidentally, being built between 1985 and 1995. One of our huge failures was the state of Connecticut. I think you built 5 incinerators. Now your governor is beginning to recognize that it was a mistake and pursuing some of the things that we were talking about many years ago. So I didn't want a third issue. I was a full-time chemistry professor doing this waste stuff in my spare time. I didn't want a third issue. I didn't want a third issue that would stigmatize me as crazy as a professor. But she was very persuasive, my wife, and I started to look into it. And I thought it was going to be easy. In fact, I told her on the first night it was going to be easy, that when they hear what I read, blah, 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 they're going to stop it. It is the most difficult campaign I've ever been involved in. I've been involved in many, the Vietnam Peace Movement, Biafra, Bangladesh, nuclear power, you name it. Many, many campaigns, but nothing is more frustrating. Because normally I've been fighting people with black hats on. You know, Dow, DuPont, Monsanto. It's very easy to get the public concerned when you see these profit-greedy, fracking people. It's very easy to get people upset about it because they have black hats on. They're greedy. They're looters of our planet. But you're dealing with very respectable people, pediatricians, professors of dentistry, state health department. These are angels in white coats. Not difficult. It's very difficult to deal with them. I hope some are here. Anyway, the end result, after 14 years, we wrote this book, The Case Against Fluoride. I don't make any profit out of it, by the way. This goes to our parent group, Profit. But the good thing is I had the help of 2 other professors, retired professors, James Beck, an MD, a PhD from Calgary, and Spenny Micklem, equivalent of a PhD from Oxford in biology, professor from Edinburgh University. And those 2 really made this book. They got the tone right. Everything was absolutely documented, 80 pages of references to the scientific literature. They wouldn't put anything in there that they couldn't back up solidly. And I thought it would raise the level of debate, but after 3 years, now nearly 4, there's not been one single refutation of this book. None of the proponents of this have sat down and done what I would have done. If they produced a book called The Case for Fluoride, I would have sat down with my colleagues, and within a matter of weeks, we would have had a documented rebuttal of every argument that they put there. And we would have been, I hope, prepared to admit, if we were wrong in certain places, that we would admit that. But it didn't happen. But still they attack us as being anti-science, getting all our science from the internet, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, here's the quote from Henrik Ibsen. I'm delighted by this quote. I was driving one morning and I heard Garrison Keillor on public radio talking his little poetry thing in the morning, and he read this quote. Henrik Ibsen wrote the play The Enemy of the People. If you haven't read that, you should read it, because if you understand that play, it tells you a lot about fluoridation. The messenger gets attacked, essentially. It's not only what we've inherited from our father and mother that walks in us, It's all sorts of dead ideas and lifeless old beliefs and so forth. They have no vitality, but they cling to us all the same, and we cannot shake them off. Whenever I take up a newspaper, I seem to see ghosts gliding between the lines. There must be ghosts all the country over, as thick as the sands of the sea, and then we are, one and all, so pitifully afraid of the light. Joe, you're not pitifully afraid of the light. This is fossilized. This idea of fluoridation has fossilized in the dental and medical communities. They are not willing to dig that fossil up and re-examine its basic science, and as I think should reject it if they did that. Anyway, that's what we're up against. So I'm going to give you, first of all, 4 simple facts and one realization that opened my mind back in 1996 when my wife, who's sitting over there, shared this with me. And then the second thing is, I usually put this at the end, but I think it's more important to put it at the beginning. There are better ways of fighting tooth decay. We don't have to settle for second best. We don't have to settle for putting a toxic substance in the drinking water. We don't have to do that. There are better ways of fighting tooth decay, which most of the world does. We're the odd man out. Thirdly, the events that have made fluoridation obsolete, they should never have started, but having started, there are many events since 1990 which should have forced government to say, this is a mistake, we should stop. And lastly, I'm going to look at one specific thing. I'm very concerned about the fact that fluoride damages the brain and maybe lowering the IQ in children. And I'm going to do a calculation which, if the EPA, the US EPA was to do, would end fluoridation tomorrow. And that is determine a safe drinking water standard for fluoride, the goal, the MCLG. If they did it based upon the IQ studies, it would end fluoridation. But there again, politics is more interested in protecting this policy in Washington than in protecting our health. Okay, and in that, I should say, in that context, what you're doing here in Connecticut, not just Joe, but the other politicians who are interested in this issue, and the citizen activists here, who are second to none, who've been championing the GMO battle and other battles against fracking and so on, you could set the ball in motion here in Connecticut to end fluoridation at the periphery, and it will have a huge impact in DC if you could lift this mandatory fluoridation bill. Okay, so the 4 simple facts then. The first simple fact in 1996 that I read about was that the level of fluoride in mother's milk is extremely low. Remember what mother's milk is. It's a baby's first meal, and it's been developed over hundreds of thousands of years to be the ideal meal for the newborn baby, to provide that baby with all the things it needs for healthy development. Healthy bones, healthy teeth, everything. And yet the level in mother's milk is extremely low, 0.004 parts per million. And that means a bottle-fed baby in Connecticut is getting between 175 and 300 times the fluoride dose that nature intended. Now, if the dentist were here, I would like to say, what makes you think that you know more about what the baby needs than nature herself? I'd love to hear their response to that. I haven't heard a good one yet. Well, I did actually. The Director of Health in Victoria, Australia, when I asked him that question, why was it, if fluoride was so good for teeth, why was it so low in mother's milk? And his response was, Chief Health Officer of Victoria, was, Mother Nature has dealt some children a raw deal. That was his response, that Mother Nature dealt some children a raw deal. Some children being those children that are unfortunate enough not to live in a fluoridated, artificially fluoridated community. Now, mother's milk protects our babies from fluoride. I think that's fairly clear, that the breast is acting as a filter, keeping fluoride away from the baby. The second devastating fact is that there's not one single process in the human body that needs fluoride. No one's ever identified a role for fluoride in biochemistry. It's not an essential nutrient. On the other hand, fluoride is known to cause many problems for biology. It interferes with enzymes, it interacts with, switches on G proteins, blah, blah, blah. There are many, many things. In fact, the first opponents of fluoridation in the United States were biochemists, particularly biochemists from Wisconsin in 1950s when some dentists were trying to force fluoridation through in Wisconsin. It was the biochemists that opposed this because they'd used fluoride in their experiments to inhibit enzymes. Fourthly, fluoride accumulates. It isn't just one day, it's a lifetime. You have a practice here which is saying to people, you're going to have this every day in every glass of water, every cup of coffee, every meal you eat, and you're going to have it for the rest of your lives. Now, it's going to be going on a long time. And the kidney gets rid of about 50, maybe 60% of the fluoride that we ingest each day, but the rest accumulates in our bones. And we know from India and China that lifetime accumulation of fluoride in the bones damages the bones. And the first symptoms are just like arthritis, damages the bones and the connective tissues. So you get stiffness of the joints, pains in the bones, which are not showing up in x-rays. So we're blind to this. We're not studying the possibility that fluoride is increasing arthritis rates in this country, although they are increasing. We're not studying to see if fluoride is a factor here. Another aspect of politics. If you don't look, you don't find. Now the realization, when I started to read this, is that we should never use the public water supply to deliver medical treatment. A realization is, interestingly, that we realize we have not used the public water supply to deliver any other medical treatment, any other nutrient, any other substance to improve our health. We've never done it. We've only done it with fluoride. Well, why shouldn't we do that? Well, the answer is very straightforward. Once you put your medicine in the water, you can't control the dose. Once you put the medicine in the water, you can't control who gets it. It goes to everyone. It's totally indiscriminate. And we see that the worst is bottle-fed babies. Bottle-fed babies getting the highest dose of fluoride of any human beings in our society. And it violates the individual's right to informed consent to medication. I am absolutely amazed, even though the AMA, the American Medical Association, has volumes about informed consent on its homepage, that we have doctors standing by and allowing dentists to practice dentistry using the public water supply and every day violating the individual's right to informed consent to medication. Even when we have individuals at council meetings saying, I do not give you my consent to do this to me, they continue to do it because the white coats tell them it's okay. Well, it's not okay. It violates. Communities are doing to everyone what an individual doctor can do to no one. There's no doctor in Connecticut that can force a patient to take a medication unless they're mentally ill or maybe in prison. But we're doing that to everyone. And Connecticut, it's mandatory for the whole state. This is bizarre. Okay. So better ways of fighting tooth decay. Hopefully, a lot of this we can all agree upon. The majority of countries do not fluoridate their water in the world. That includes 97% of the Western population is not drinking fluoridated water. Only 4 of those countries fluoridate their salt, so the majority neither fluoridate their water nor their salt. According to World Health Organization data, they collected for every country, for 12-year-olds, tooth decay has been coming down as fast in fluoridated countries, so that's tooth decay in 12-year-olds from the 1970s to more or less the present. Now, if you're a promoter of fluoridation, you say, look, fluoridation is working. In fact, that's exactly what the CDC did in 1999. They took the graph for the United States, showed that fluoridation, the tooth decay was coming down, and said this is because the percentage of the population drinking fluoridated water has gone up. Okay, so now let's look at the graphs they don't show. There's the tooth decay rates coming down in 12-year-olds in non-fluoridated countries. And if you want to put them all together, you can't tell the difference. You can't tell the difference whether that 12-year-old has grown up in a fluoridated or a non-fluoridated country. A better strategy. Everyone agrees, and I'll give you the evidence of this later, that fluoride's benefits are largely topical. It works on the outside of the tooth. So it makes more sense to provide topical treatments. These could be provided as fluoride varnishes, or more simply with brushing with fluoridated toothpaste. Better still, we should encourage the use of xylitol toothpaste. Xylitol is a natural sugar, and it prevents the bacteria in the mouth from sticking to the teeth, and they can't survive then. And they've been using this in Scandinavia, Japan for over 30 years. Xylitol. Also, we have to recognize that most of the tooth decay today is concentrated in low-income families. There's a far greater relationship between tooth decay and poverty than there is between tooth decay and any fluoride exposure. So recognizing, I think it's something like 80% of tooth decay is in 20% of the kids, and those 20% of the kids are largely from low-income families. We need to target those families with better dental education and better diet. Those are the keys. They need not swallow a substance that could put them at greater disadvantage. Later on, when I go on to the IQ studies, the last children that you want exposed to fluoride, if fluoride lowers IQ, are low-income families, because their IQ is already compromised by many other social economic factors. You don't want to make it worse for them. And the trouble with fluoride is its toxic effects are greatest when you've got poor diet. If you've got low protein, low calcium, low vitamins, that's when fluoride is worse. And that's where you would expect to find it. Poor diet in low-income families. So the very people that are being targeted with fluoridation are the very last people, the last children that want to get this poison. So, as I've said, fluoride's toxic effects are made worse by poor diet. Now, fortunately, Scotland does not have water fluoridation, and the Scottish government has to deal with this. They can't fluoridate the water. And yet they want to do something about tooth decay, and especially in low-income areas in places like Glasgow and elsewhere. And they instigated this Child Smile program. And the features of this is a school-based toothbrushing schemes, offering healthy snacks and drinks to children at schools, oral health advice to children and families on healthy weaning, diet, teething, and toothbrushing, annual dental checkups and treatment if required, and fluoride varnish applications. So most of us are not against fluoride use in the dentist chair, topical treatments. What we are against is giving it willy-nilly in the water supply. And of course, if you lifted mandatory fluoridation in Connecticut, you could continue fluoride varnishes. Now, the proportion of children aged 4 to 6 years without obvious dental decay has risen from 42.3% in 1996 to 67% in 2012. And that's according to the Scottish government. And even better, now this was attributed to the nursery school toothbrushing. Children at the earliest age in nursery school, kindergarten, they reckon that this was the biggest contributor, getting those kids just to brush their teeth and teaching them how to do it. The proportion of children aged 10 to 12 with obvious dental decay, without obvious dental decay, rose from 52.9% in 2005 to 69.4% in 2011 and 72.8% in 2013. They reached their 70% goal several years before the target date, 72.8%. This is remarkably cost effective. Here's a recent BBC report on the same issue, BBC Scotland. A scheme to encourage nursery children to brush their teeth has saved more than £6 million in dental costs according to a new study. Child Smile involves staff at all Scottish nurseries offering free supervised toothbrushing every day. It emphasises the importance of toothbrushing and helps parents establish a healthy diet from the earliest stage. Glasgow researchers found that the scheme had reduced the cost of treating dental disease in 5-year-olds by more than half between 2001 and 2010. So it's not as if we're saying end this mandatory fluoridation and let's grapple with chaos. Let's leave it to laissez-faire individual activities and so on. No! There are programs that you can invest in the less money and get better results and take away this horrible forcing it on people that don't want it. So in short, our kids need more brushing, more fruit and vegetables, less sugar, and my wife would add in here, a living wage. A living wage. Tooth decay is a function of poverty, period. And if we're content to be the richest country in the world and treat people in this miserable fashion of working their butts off all for hours and hours a week and then pay them, they can't even survive on it. I don't know what I would do. I was lucky. I was one of the lucky ones. I got a degree, I taught at a university, and I didn't have to do what people I've seen had to do. One job here, another job here, another job here, just to get enough money to feed your kids. And we can live with that once we've got these bloody people, crooks running our banks, making billions of dollars. You know, it makes me puke. And a lot of people, if there are legislators here, a lot of people out there are getting really pissed off with this. When they're seeing people that can't even feed their kids, can't give them decent housing, can't give them warmth, and yet they're reading about these people bringing back these salaries for billions of dollars. So for doing what? Because they're good gamblers on Wall Street? Give me a break. Sorry. Less sugar means less tooth decay and less obesity. So let's get to the real thing here. This is the message. What you need to do to fight obesity is the same as what you need to do to fight tooth decay, or vice versa. And if, in fact, you institute a program to fight tooth decay with the Scottish methods, you will have the huge bonus of fighting obesity. And that would save this country billions of dollars. So just taking the money for the fluoridation chemicals, and all the money's being frittered away with public relations and propaganda from the CDC and others, if you took that money and put it into an educational program, it would be worth every penny, because you could also be fighting obesity. I would put the two together. Less obesity means less diabetes and fewer heart attacks. Obesity is going to cost this country billions of dollars in healthcare over the next decade or so. In other words, education to promote less sugar consumption is a very good investment. So we need education, not fluoridation, to fight tooth decay and obesity. So that's the better alternative. And it's not theoretical. What I would like to see, instead of taxpayers' money going to the CDC to promote fluoridation, there are plenty of people promoting fluoridation. American Dental Association, Pew Charitable Trust, they got multi-billion-dollar interests here. They're promoting it. We don't need to have taxpayers' money being spent on propaganda. We're going to use taxpayers' money. The CDC should investigate what they're doing in Scotland, what they're doing in these other countries. That would be a good investment of taxpayers' money. The events that have made fluoridation obsolete. Event number one. Starting in about 1982, a number of articles started appearing in major journals, science journals, Science, Nature, which indicated there was little difference in tooth decay between fluoridated and non-fluoridated communities. And some of these articles are Leverett in Science, Calhoun in several journals. Diesendorf in Nature, The Mystery of Declining Tooth Decay, is a classic, 1986. Gray from Canada, similar paper. Mysterious, but why is there no difference in tooth decay between communities with fluoridated and non-fluoridated? The question was posed. And the response was in 1990, the US National Institute for Dental Research did a huge survey. The survey was done in 86, 87. The largest ever done. It was expensive, cost the taxpayers about $4 million. They looked at tooth decay in 39,000 children in 84 communities. And what they looked at was decayed, missing, and filled permanent tooth surfaces. The surfaces, how many surfaces? This is more sensitive measure than decayed, missing, and filled teeth. Anyway, they looked at children who'd lived all their lives in fluoridated communities. I should explain, by the way, that the cutting teeth, the top 6 and the bottom 6, I call them cutting teeth, their official name, they have 4 surfaces, and the rest of the teeth, the chewing teeth, they have 5 surfaces. And by the time all the teeth have come out in a child's mouth, 128 tooth surfaces. Now that's the context. So what was the tooth decay, the average tooth decay in 5-year-olds to 17, average from 5 to 17, of children who'd lived all their lives in a fluoridated community? There were about 8,000 kids in that part of the study. 2.8. And the kids who lived all their lives in a non-fluoridated community, there were about 8,000 in that, 3.4. So the saving in tooth decay from this study is 0.6 of 1 tooth surface out of 128. A very, very small saving. However, it's worse than that, because not only was the saving small, but it was not even shown to be statistically significant, which is very revealing, because this was a government-funded study. Why weren't the statistics provided to demonstrate that these figures were statistically significant? Well, the answer is because it wasn't statistically significant. People who revisit this have found that. It wasn't a statistically significant result. If we tried to get away with that, we'd be laughed out of court if we were going around claiming this great benefit. Now, more recently, a much smaller study, but a more precise study, was done by Warren and co-workers. This is part of the Iowa study, another US government-funded study. And they have meticulously estimated how much fluoride children were getting on a daily basis in their study. They've been following these children from birth. And so this is for the first time ever somebody looked at tooth decay as a function of individual exposure. Not whether they lived in a fluoridated or non-fluoridated community, but just how much fluoride they were getting. And what they were after was to tell us what the optimal dose, what was the optimal dose? How many milligrams of fluoride a day did kids need to fight tooth decay? That's what they wanted. Strange that it should be 2009 before they got around to doing that. But what they found was there was no clear relationship between how much fluoride kids were swallowing and tooth decay. And this is what they said. These findings suggest that achieving a caries-free status may have relatively little to do with fluoride intake. Well, I've already given you the answer to this, but the answer, the explanation of why internationally you see no difference between tooth decay of fluoridated, non-fluoridated countries. Why, when you do the big study in the US and look at 39,000 children, they don't find much of a difference. And then this very precise study from Warren, the answer to why this is happening is, I beg your pardon, I've got this out of context. There's never been, before I get to that argument, there's never been a randomized controlled trial to demonstrate the effectiveness of fluoridation. I think that's partly because the FDA has never regulated fluoride. If the FDA were to regulate fluoride for ingestion, either as prescription tablets or fluoride in water, then they would have required somebody to do a randomized controlled trial to demonstrate effectiveness as they do for other drugs. But the FDA has not got involved, and as a result, they've got away with no RCTs. And so we're left with grade B studies. And the problem with the grade B studies is they're complicated. When you compare two communities, one fluoridated, one non-fluoridated, there's so many factors, so many confounding variables that can influence decay rates. Unless incredibly good study controls for all those variables, you can get any result that you want. And that's what we've been dealing with for 60 years, any result that you want, not the randomized control trial. So it's true to say that it's unproven that swallowing fluoride reduces tooth decay. So now for the explanation. The second event which explains all these results came in 1999 when the CDC, the big promoter of fluoridation in the United States, conceded that the predominant benefit of fluoride is topical, not systemic. let's look at their actual words. They said, fluoride's carries preventive properties initially were attributed to changes in enamel during tooth development. And incidentally, this is why pediatricians gave fluoride tablets to pregnant women and to babies before their teeth had erupted, to try to get the fluoride into the enamel to protect them from acid attack from bacteria rotting down sugar when their teeth finally erupted. So we initially, that's what they said, we initially thought it was building up of the fluoride in the enamel during the development, before eruption. And then they go on to say, however, laboratory and epidemiologic research suggests that fluoride prevents dental caries predominantly after eruption of the tooth into the mouth, and its actions primarily are topical. Oops! After 49 years after the US Public Health Service endorsed fluoridation, they admitted that the mechanism that they believed that fluoride worked was wrong. Whoops. It was topical. Now, if fluoride works primarily on the outside of the tooth and not from inside the body, why swallow fluoride and expose every tissue of the body to a toxic substance when you can brush it on your teeth and spit it out? And why put it in the drinking water and force it on people who don't want it? It would be so nice to actually debate this with the dental community, wouldn't it? So that you actually get the response to this kind of information. But no, they can keep this going because they're not forced to debate. They can just keep using their authority to establish that fluoridation is safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective. I say so, this organization's, you know how it works. Instead of admitting these fairly obvious conclusions, public health agencies in the fluoridating countries, most of which I've been to, Australia, New Zealand, Israel, Ireland, throughout Canada, throughout the United States, public health agencies in these fluoridating countries are using propaganda, not science, to promote this obsolete practice. And I want to give you an example so you don't think I'm speaking out of turn here. Queensland, that had resisted fluoridation for 50 years, introduced the new Premier of Queensland in 2006, 2007, introduced mandatory statewide fluoridation by fiat, just like that. But during the process, they conducted a public relations campaign. This is Queensland Health. This is a bureaucracy, a health agency, Queensland Health. And this is one of the advertisements they ran in Townsville. Water supplies have been fluoridated since 1964, resulting in 65% less tooth decay in children than those in Brisbane. Now put yourself in the shoes of the average citizen of Brisbane who reads that. 65% less tooth decay because they're fluoridated. Oh, we should do that too. Why hold back? Well, let's look at that 65% figure. It comes from one paper and it comes from one age range, and there you can see 65%, the penultimate figure on the right. That's the percentage difference in DMFS, which I talked about for the Brunel and Carlos paper. 65%. And the arithmetic is correct. The DMFS in Townsville for 7-year-olds was 0.09 DMFS. The DMFS for Brisbane is 0.26. And yes, if you do the arithmetic, that's a 65% difference. But do the other arithmetic, subtract one from the other, and it's actually a saving of 0.17 of one tooth surface. Now, could you imagine what those advertisements would have looked like if they'd actually said that to the people? You could save 0.17 of a tooth surface. In other words, if you had 5 children, for each 5 children, you'd say, what, one tooth surface? Incredible! So I classify that as strictly speaking, it's honest, it's cherry-picked, but it's honest, the arithmetic is honest, but misleading. And we shouldn't have our government health officials misleading decision makers. It gets worse. According to Queensland Health, this is what teeth exposed to fluoridated water look like. This is what teeth look like that are not exposed to fluoridated water. That would make Goebbels blush, that propaganda there. What you're looking at there is baby bottle tooth decay. has absolutely nothing to do with fluoridation or lack of fluoridation. You can find that in low-income families, whether they live in fluoridated or non-fluoridated countries. There's the leaflet. This leaflet, the State of Oral Health in Queensland, was sent to every MP in the Queensland Parliament before they voted on mandatory fluoridation. Now, if one thing you could do in Connecticut, what I'd like to see is there's absolutely no reason for bureaucrats to spin and peddle propaganda. And if they do, they should be sacked. Sacked. I know why they do it. They're required to do it by the administrators. This is policy. Your job is not to question policy. Your job is to carry out policy. Be a robot. Well, I don't want to pay taxpayers' money to robots. And so we have legislation to protect whistleblowers. That's allowing people to speak out. And that's good. That's good legislation. But what about legislation to prevent people closing their mouths when they should open them? That they shouldn't go along with a policy that's undefendable scientifically. And they certainly shouldn't be in the process of being part of a chain of command which misleads the public. So that's what I would recommend that you consider in instant fire. I would have instant firing for any not politicians, any civil servant that lies, massages, spins, instant firing. Here's another example. Here's this medical officer of health. She's probably pulling down a salary of $250,000 a year. She doesn't want to lose that salary, so she's out there being a puppet for this practice, holding up, yes, once again, a picture of baby bottle tooth decay, as if this is what you get if you don't have water fluoridation. Dishonest. That's a betrayal of the public's trust. This is what we're dealing with. Event 3. In 2006, the United States National Research Council published a 3-year review. This was a remarkable review because it was the first time in history that they got a balanced panel. They had 3 opposed to fluoridation, 3 for fluoridation, and 6 are not uncommitted. They expected to take 1 year. It took them 3 years. They produced this classic document, 500 pages, 1,100 references. Fluoride in drinking water, a scientific review of EPA standards. Now what they indicated, their remit was not to review water fluoridation, not to review the benefits of fluoridation or necessarily the risk of fluoridation. Their remit was to look to see what, if any, fluoride health effects were caused by fluoride. And they found that many health effects were caused by fluoride, based upon what was happening in countries with high natural levels in particular. But the day this is published, this massive review, the American Dental Association claimed that the NRC only looked at levels of fluoride between 2 and 4 parts per million, which was not relevant to water fluoridation at 0.7 to 1.2 parts per million. Okay, that's what they said on the day it was published. And then 6 days later, the Oral Health Division of the CDC came out with essentially the same. The findings of the NRC report are consistent with the CDC's assessment that water is safe and healthy at levels used for water fluoridation. And in 2007, the National Health and Medical Research Council in Australia brushed aside this report, even though it was far more thorough than anything that they had ever done, and said, the NRC report refers to health effects from fluoride at 2 to 4 parts per million. The reader is alerted to the fact that Australia has lower levels. Now what's wrong with these statements from the ADA, CDC, and the National Health and Medical Research Council of Australia? What's wrong? Well, first of all, they don't know the difference in concentration and dose. There would be an overlap in dose for 2 populations. Say, one drinking 1 part per million and the other drinking 2 parts per million. And even 4 parts per million, there will be an overlap in dose. Dose is what hurts you, not concentration. What hurts you is how much water you're drinking. That's where you get the dose from. It's the concentration in the water times the amount of water that you drink gives you the dose. So to compare concentrations is simplistic and totally misleading. Secondly, they have little notion of the basics of regulatory toxicology. You can't declare safety before you have done a careful risk assessment on the health endpoints which have been declared. I'm going to do that in a moment, incidentally, for the IQ studies, to show you what you have to do. But they didn't do this, and yet they instantly say, fluoridation is okay, it's safe. No change, no change. Even with all these health effects impacted. But the worst thing is, they can't even read, because in chapter 2 of this review, they looked at exposure to fluoride from subsets of the population drinking water at 1 part per million, and concluded that some of these subsets are exceeding the EPA's safe reference dose for fluoride, drinking water at 1 part per million. And here's a figure that illustrates that point. There, the red line across there is the safe reference dose determined by the EPA. The dot that I've circled is the bottle-fed baby. The bottle-fed baby is getting way above the safe reference dose for fluoride in their calculations. So how can they say, the ADA, the CDC, and say this report is not relevant to water fluoridation when they are saying that bottle-fed babies are exceeding, with the water, obviously made up with fluoridated water, are exceeding the safe reference dose. So these statements from the ADA, CDC, and NHMRC are political, not scientific statements. They are working backwards. They need to protect this policy, and anything that comes along that could anyway challenge this policy is thrown out. They're more intent on protecting the fluoridation program than protecting the public's health. We need citizens like Elaine and Tara and others to get parents angry about this. The governments are not doing their job. Your government here is not doing its job. Your governor is not doing its job. This legislature is not doing its job. And citizens are having to spend their valuable time doing their job for them, studying the literature, reading my book, reading the NRC report, having to do the work for them. And even when we do the work for them, you just go, yawn, yawn, yawn. As long as the American Dental Association tells me it's okay, it's okay. As long as the Central Disease, it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. Simplistic kindergarten stuff. Event 4. In 2010, the US Disease Control, the CDC, admitted that our kids are being hugely overexposed to fluoride. To put this into context, when they started fluoridation, they said they expected 10% of children to get dental fluorosis in its very mild form. That's what it looks like. Up to 25% of the tooth enamel impacted with these white, opaque patches. At the other end of the spectrum of the very mild category, it's just opaque patches on the cusp of the teeth. You look around, you'll see a lot of that in Connecticut. Okay. Expected 10% of the kids to have that. That was the trade-off. Look, run the clock forward to 2010, and they're now admitting that 41% of all American children aged 12 to 15 have dental fluorosis. That's all American children, including those living in fluoridated, those living in non-fluoridated. And here are the figures: 28.5% very mild, 8.6% mild. This is what mild looks like, up to 50% of the enamel impacted. And kids who have that condition don't like to smile. And 3.6% of kids have moderate or severe dental fluorosis. Now, we could argue about the psychological damage of this, and I think it's quite clear. But the point is that this is the first indication that fluoride has poisoned the body. And the question that we should have asked and answered in 1950, before the US Public Health Service endorsed fluoridation, is when fluoride is damaging the baby's growing tooth cells and causing this condition, what is it doing to other developing tissues? Can we really believe in the fable that the fluoride knows only to interfere with the tooth cells and leave all the other cells in the developing baby untouched? Is that what we're supposed to believe? Yes, that's what we're supposed to believe. Now, event 5 is that since 1991, there's been extensive evidence that fluoride damages the brain of animals and humans. and I do mean extensive. Over 40 animal studies shows that prolonged exposure to fluoride damages the brain. 19 animal studies shows that it interferes with learning and memory. So they put rats in a maze or mice in a maze, they give them some fluoride, and they can't learn as well, can't remember as well. Other neurobehavioral deficits, fetal brain damage, and 37 out of 43 IQ studies shows a lowering of IQ. Proponents of fluoridation have offered practically no published studies to offset the weight of evidence that fluoride is a potent neurotoxin. And one of the questions I would like to ask the dental associations, if there's anybody from the press here, ask them for me. What have you read personally which allows you to ignore this body of evidence? That makes you feel that there's something out there that will negate all this, that we don't have to worry about any of this, that there's no way that our children's IQ is going to be damaged at all. What have you read that's convinced you of that position? And if they haven't read anything to do that, then they're not being very responsible. They're certainly not exercising due diligence. One of the animal studies, they gave rats 1 part per million fluoride in their water for 1 year. The animals had kidney damage, brain damage, a greater uptake of aluminium into the brain, and beta amyloid deposits, which are thought to be characteristic of Alzheimer's disease. So we have the potential of fluoride damaging not just the young brain, but the elderly brain, probably when the blood-brain barrier begins to break down. One of the IQ studies, I'm very fond of this one. I know Zhang personally. I've been to China. I visited these villages where the study was done. They controlled for lead and iodine. Sometimes the proponents claim that they didn't, but they did. They've also recently controlled for arsenic, and they found a drop of 5 to 10 IQ points across the whole age range, and the whole IQ curve is shifted to the left. Fewer intelligent children and more mentally handicapped children. A whole shift in the IQ studies. In 2012, a team from Harvard did a meta-analysis on 27 of the studies published in Environmental Health Perspectives, and they acknowledged that there were weaknesses in many of the studies, needed more information. However, the results were remarkably consistent. In 26 of the 27 studies, there was a lower average IQ in the high fluoride versus the low fluoride village, and the average lowering was about 7 IQ points. The proponents have argued, oh, well, these studies had very high concentrations and you can ignore these studies. Well, it's not true. In 9 of these studies, the high fluoride village was less than 3 parts per million. Less than 3 parts per million. So, and again, comparing concentrations instead of comparing doses is simplistic. What we need is a margin of safety analysis. So I'm going to do that for you now. I'm not sure about the time, but hopefully you can stay for this. This is essentially the end. The goal is to estimate a safe dose of fluoride which we would confidently predict would protect all our children, not the average child, but all our children, including the most sensitive, in a large population from lowered IQ. After all, this is a government policy. You're exposing every man, woman, and child to this stuff every day of their lives, and you should be absolutely confident that you know a safe dose, that you know a dose which wouldn't have this effect. So, our task is to find what is called the no observable adverse effect level, the NOEL, and they divide that by a margin of safety of 10 to protect the whole population. That's what we're aiming for here. I'm sorry about the jargon, but I think you can get most of this. So we've got to find the study with the lowest concentration where IQ was lowered. Here are 5 of those studies. The IQ was lowered at 1.8, 2, 2.9, 2.5, 2.38. Okay. We could be very, very cavalier and take the highest number there, 2.9. But I'm going to take what the standard way would be to take the lowest level, which is 1.8. Now, the next problem we have is that we've got here is a concentration, and not a dose. Well, we don't know what the dose is. Well, we can calculate a dose range. by taking the likely range of water that those kids were consuming. So if the children drank 1 litre of water a day, they'd be getting 1.8 milligrams per day. 1.8 milligrams per litre, you drink 1 litre, 1.8 milligrams. If they drank a half a litre, they get 0.9 milligrams a day. If they drank 2 litres, they'll get 3.6 milligrams per day. So that gives us a fairly comfortable range, 0.9 to 3.6 milligrams per day. Let's take the lowest end of that to be cautious. Err on the side of safety, we'll take 0.9. Now, determining the low L, that's the low L. We'll take that as 0.9. The lowest observable adverse effect level we're going to say is 0.9. Now we've got to calculate the no L. The no L, you divide the low L by 10. Now why you do that? That seems awfully cautious, doesn't it? No, you've got this 0.9 refers to a small population of Chinese children, a few hundred. They've got almost identical genetics. They have similar lifestyles. You've got a very small population to extrapolate from. Now we've got to extrapolate to the whole population of the United States, where you have a huge range of sensitivity, genetics, diet, many, many differences. And the standard default value to protect a whole population is called intraspecies variation, is a factor of 10. I beg your pardon. I've got that wrong. If you have a low L and you don't have a no L, you divide by 10 to get to the no L, the no observable adverse effect level. That I personally would challenge. I don't like that. I'd rather deal with the low L and do the next step, which I've just described, to the safety margin to protect the whole range of children from sensitivity. But I'll keep it in because that's the official policy. Anyway, so the no L then was 0.09, applying the safety factor to the no L to protect the whole population. You're down to 0.009 milligrams per day. The safe dose then, sufficient to protect everyone in a large population from lowered IQ, 0.009 milligrams per day. Now that amounts to, you wouldn't want children to, in the United States, to drink more than 2 teaspoons of fluoridated water to be sure that you're protecting everyone. Now, in other words, you don't want them getting more than 9 milliliters of water a day. Let's start dropping the sensitivity factors. Let's drop the interspecies variation. That means they couldn't drink more than 90 milliliters of water a day. That's 1 glass of water. Okay, let's drop another safety factor. Let's drop the no L, the low L to no L. That means a child shouldn't drink more than 900 milliliters. That's less than a litre. So even if you throw away the precautionary factors, the safety factors, you're still left with the conclusion that with those numbers from these Chinese studies, that you cannot protect all children drinking fluoridated water from a lowered IQ. Okay, I've been through that. And so simply put, if fluoride lowers the IQ of children drinking water 1.8 parts per million fluoride in a small study group, it's not safe, protective against lowered IQ for all children in a large population drinking fluoridated water between 0.7 and 1.2 parts per million. I am going to rush over these because of the interest of time. Philip Grandjean said about these results, he was part of the Harvard Review, he's well famous for his work on mercury. He said, fluoride seems to fit in with lead, mercury and other poisons that cause chemical brain drain. The effect of each toxicant may be small, but combined damage on a population scale can be serious, especially because the brain power of the next generation is critical to all of us. And I just want to illustrate this in ending with these simple pictures. That's the normal distribution of IQ in a large population, the famous bell-shaped curve. So most people in the population would have an IQ clustering around the average, which is about 100. But at the 2 tails of your bell-shaped curve, you have those kids above 130 are very bright, approaching genius level. That green is the area under the curve. of geniuses in your society, the fraction of the total which are geniuses, and the magenta is the fraction which are mentally handicapped. So those tails are very important to us. Now, if you shifted the IQ over by 5 IQ points, which we believe we did when we had lead in gasoline, you don't notice, a parent wouldn't notice the difference in a kid with an IQ of 100 or 95, or a school teacher. So the effect on the average person is not going to be very noticeable. But look what you do to the two tails. You halve the number of geniuses in your society, you double the number of mentally handicapped. That has huge social and economic ramifications for a society like the United States competing in the global marketplace. Huge ramifications. And if we have an inkling, and we don't just have an inkling, we have enough evidence which would eliminate fluoride as an additive to motor fuel. We don't just have an inkling, we have a large body of evidence that says fluoride interferes with the brain, lowers IQ in children. The precautionary principle says you have to stop. You can't just keep running this experiment until American scientists eventually get round to trying to duplicate what the Chinese, Iranians, Mexicans, and Indians have done. We can't wait. You can't wait for that absolute proof from the wonderful scientists that we have. You have to go with what we've got, and what we've got says there's a real problem here. And the bottom line is, why do we continue to do this and run these risks when the benefits are hardly established, the benefits are weak to non-existent, the admission that it works topically, with topical applications universally available, and with countries like Scotland demonstrating that there are viable alternatives which are actually cost-effective. There is no justification for taking these risks. And I've only just concentrated on IQ. I could have talked about osteosarcoma. Fluoride may be killing people. I could have talked about people that are sensitive to fluoride. I could have talked about lowered thyroid function. But it's overkill. If this doesn't convince you, if lowering IQ of children does not convince you that this is something that should be stopped, I think there's no point in going further. I mean, so I'm waiting to hear the response of the dental community to this scientific information. Scientific response, please, to scientific information. Why should we continue this practice? Why should we force this on people who don't want it? And why should we not tell women who are bottle feeding their babies that there are serious risks being involved here? They're not being warned. And even if you don't even introduce an overthrow of this mandatory fluoridation, which I think is a no-brainer, you should do that. Even if you don't think you could do that, at least get your health departments to warn mothers not to bottle feed their babies with fluoridated water. It's not doing them a darn bit of good, and it can only cause harm. That's enough I've had to say. I'm sorry I seemed to be a little angry at times. You would be angry if you've been fighting this for 18 years and you had to deal with the crap we have to deal with from these so-called professional bodies.
Can we ask some questions?
Yes, I do want to just point out, I do have copies of both my book here. I don't make any money out of this. All profits go to our parent organization. But for those who want to get a handle on these issues, or particularly this one, but this one's also available, you're welcome to it. And we also have a few free copies of this videotape called Professional Perspectives on Fluoridation, 28 minutes long, 15 scientists, well established, explaining why they think fluoridation is a bad idea. So it isn't just single people like me, there's quite a few people involved. Okay, question?
Couple and they're basic. Xylitol, isn't that in chewing gum too?
It can be put into chewing gum. There's one caution here, and I've never explored this biochemically. It turns out that some breeds of dogs are killed by fluoride. Some breeds of dogs.
Oh, by xylitol too.
By xylitol, yeah. And so my thought is, well then let's drop the chewing gum, because the most likely way that a dog is going to get its teeth into xylitol is going to be from chewing gum that someone's thrown out. So I would emphasize xylitol mints, which kids can suck on until they're gone, or xylitol toothpaste, and the dogs are not going to get into that. So it's a weird thing. I mean, why it seems to be completely harmless for human beings unless they eat bucket loads of it, try to use it as a sugar substitute, then they'll probably get diarrhea big time. So, but that's the thing. Don't use it in the toothpaste, in the chewing gum.
Okay. As far as, if you don't have reverse osmosis, but you do have a filtration system, does it take any of the fluoride out?
Not the cheap ones. The Brita filters, the charcoal filters don't take it out. If you're looking for a cheap system, I urge you to look into charcoal, not charcoal, sorry.
Bone char?
Bone char. Bone char. It seems to be a reasonable price, and it's effective. They certainly use bone char on a large scale. Defluoridation. Bone char.
C-H-A-R. It's like
C-H-A.
bone. It's made from bones?
It's made from bone.
Yeah.
Bone is a terrific absorber of fluoride.
Oh.
And it's cheap. It's cheap.
That's good to hear.
What, excuse me, what's the difference between the fluoride that they put in our water and what they refer to as naturally occurring fluoride?
Well, before I say anything, just so you don't run off with the notion that natural fluoride is okay and the nasty stuff they put in our water is bad, millions of people have had their lives ruined by natural fluoride. What we're talking about, children's IQ have been lowered by natural fluoride. People's bones have been wrecked by natural fluoride. So there's nothing sacred about the notion that something that occurs naturally is somehow safe. Arsenic occurs naturally, doesn't make arsenic safe. Now, that's the caveat. But the answer is several differences. First of all, the fluoridating chemicals they use are contaminated. They're taken from the wet scrubbing systems of the phosphate fertilizer industry. They're contaminated with things like arsenic. Arsenic is a known human carcinogen. From the EPA's point of view, there's no safe level for arsenic. The MCLG, maximum contaminant level goal, is 0. So it's crazy but true that you can say categorically that using these industrial grade waste products to fluoridate the water is going to increase cancer rates in the United States. How much it's increased is a different issue. That would have to be teased out. So that's the first thing. They're contaminated. They're not pharmaceutical grade. The second issue is that there are huge questions about what happens to the chemical when it's put in. They will argue that when you put the hexafluorosilicic acid, to give it its full name, into the water, it completely dissociates with dilution. The problem with this is what happens when the diluted material hits our stomach, because that dissociation is pH dependent. It depends upon the acidity. And so when that solution hits our stomach, does it get reassociated? The pH of the stomach is between 1 and 2. So this stuff will get reassociated. And so this whole notion that they have, they claim, what they claim is we do not have to test this. We do not have to test this because we've already tested fluoride toxicologically. We've done lots and lots of testing on fluoride. Not very good tests, by the way, but they've done a lot of tests on fluoride. And what they're saying is that when the hexafluorosilicic acid goes into the water, completely dissociated, it's the same, and after it's been neutralized, it's the same as a fluoride, sodium fluoride. That's what they're saying. Same as sodium fluoride, not to worry about it. But you have this problem, as I say, what happens when it re-hits the stomach at low pH, and also what happens in the process when you've got all this water being diluted with all these different metal ions in there, contaminants. Are some of them captured by other species? We don't know. We don't know. So I think it's rather simplistic to just say, as they say, it's identical to sodium fluoride. We don't have to test it.
Didn't they use sodium fluoride as an insecticide?
Yep, a rodenticide, rat, roach poison, rat. But then be careful about that. That's very emotive. We're not talking about killing people with fluoride. And there are many cases where a substance is very, very nasty at high doses, but fairly benign once you got below a certain level. However, the counterbalance to that is that even at low concentrations, this is something you're getting every day. And we know it accumulates in the bones. So you just can't dismiss it on the basis of concentration. You had a question then?
Why does the CDC and the dentist, why do they cling so tenaciously to their position in the face of all this evidence?
Well, I've got a conjectural response to that. I mean, you're asking me to come up with a rational explanation for irrational behavior. As long as we agreed about that, I mean, I think it's totally irrational that these bodies continue to push this thing when they can't establish it works, they can't establish very much benefit if it does work, and that it has these risks involved, and you're forcing it on people that don't want it, and you've got alternatives. So you add all those together, this is a pretty irrational practice. Why then do they do it? Well, I'm going to just put to one side any economic aspects. I'm going to put to one side possible liabilities. I mean, the ADA has its seal of approval on all fluoride products for dentistry. In fact, you can't get the seal of approval for fluoridated toothpaste for toothpaste without fluoride in it. So, yeah, there's liabilities possibly here, and that may be the most important. But this is what I've settled for. Conjecture, only a possibility. I think the equation is this. If we lose fluoridation, we lose credibility with the public. If we lose credibility on this issue with the public, then they are going to question our other practices. We're going to threaten other practices. And I happen to think that some of those other practices might be far more important to them than fluoridation. So if you felt that by losing fluoridation, you lost, say, vaccination, or you got more people questioning vaccination, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry, then you could understand their motivation. So I suggest to you that they're defending other health issues by proxy. They're defending fluoridation, but what they're really defending is these other things that they would then have to deal with if they gave up fluoridation. So they're postponing the ugly day when they admit this. They're going to fight for as long as they can not to admit this problem. And so, if you like, you've got a horrible calculation there, which is the end justifies the means. The good that they think they're protecting outweighs the bad that they are perpetrating. So they've got a good reason for doing this. But what I say is, if you play your cards right, if you say, look, we thought this was a good idea, but we got the mechanism wrong, and it's now clear that fluoride works topically, not systemically, this change in mechanism, we don't want to abandon the use of fluoride, we just don't want people to swallow it anymore. We would like people to brush it on the surface of their teeth. And I think they're not going to lose by doing this. They're not going to lose by doing it. Most people do not lose credibility when they admit that they were wrong. Admitting that they're wrong, bite the bullet, receive whatever negative press that they get, and then move on, knowing that you're doing the right thing. I think most people would be pretty forgiving of this. I really do.
Thank you. You're right.
One more.
India?
When I recommend to pregnant women, if they're going to bottle feed, to not use fluoridated water, do you have a recommendation because the plastic containers I worry about, and the BPA and the BPS?
Yeah.
So what do you tell them
Well,
besides filtration system?
we were discussing this morning. One thing to do is to find the nearest spring to you. There are a lot of springs around. Apparently there are directories to springs. So if you get spring water, have it tested. It doesn't cost much to test, probably $20, $25 or something to get it tested. I would then go for spring water that you purchase, that gets delivered to you in large containers. I know what you're going to say. They come in these big plastic polycarbonate. So yeah, you may have a endocrine disruption issue there. So the advantage of getting it from a spring is you could use water containers. Heavy.
Glass, you could use
Water
glass.
flask,
You could get
water
gas.
flask.
You could use
Yeah.
glass.
But the best thing really is to get it out. Just to get it out.
Make it easier.
But use these as a backup for now. You could, okay, here's another thing. You could use distilled water. But again, what container does that come in?
Well, they have a distiller at Raw Food Central, so basically he's attached, basically it looks like the Poland Spring and it's attached and there's some system inside the machine that takes the water from the town and then filtrates it through this distiller and takes out all the minerals. So that's another way to do it.
The only
But
thing I'm worried about
You lose the
is-
minerals though, that's the only
I'm
problem.
worried about losing those minerals, yes, from the water. If you're dirtying up babies now, because this is the only diet they're getting, you've got to make sure, well, hopefully, best see, of course, is breastfeed. Breastfeed if you possibly can. If you can't breastfeed, then it's going to be bottle feeding, but use clean water. And hopefully, one way or another, you're getting those nutrients. I think some health stores provide you with sachets of nutrients to add if you're taking water, using distilled water. So you can use the distilled water
Remineralize them.
and take the distilled water, then add the whatever it is, sachet of nutrients. You want the calcium, you want the magnesium.
Okay.
The trouble, another problem is this: you can go to great lengths to protect yourself from this situation, but it's very difficult to protect you from all sources, because when you go downtown, every glass of water, every cup of coffee, glass of water, it's going to be fluoridated. When you go to a friend's house, it's going to be fluoridated. So it's awfully difficult to protect yourself from these methods. It's very difficult. You have to go to great lengths. And why should we be, this impacted in this way?
I don't drink any water outside of my house. I can't have a cup of coffee. I can't have a soup. I can't have rice. Because whenever I drink the fluoride, my thyroid starts moving around and starts tightening up and
Yeah.
I start having a headache.
This is, it's very sad. This is a lot of people. Maybe 1% of the population is very sensitive to fluoride, and probably most of them don't realize that. They're complaining of a variety of effects. They're getting treatment which is absolutely useless, especially for those which are because of the thyroid complication. And one of the sad things is that because the FDA has never regulated fluoride for ingestion, it means that they're not tracking. They're not tracking side effects. There's nobody in this country receiving complaints. The FDA is not asking for people to send in evidence that they're being harmed. They're not. If they regulate a drug and go through the randomized control studies, etc. One of the things that they do once they agree to allow this drug, then they monitor it. Then doctors and citizens report health effects. But it's not happening here. Nor are doctors cued into this. They're not told that this is a possibility, so the doctors have no idea. So the typical thing that happens is someone says, "Oh, doc, I got this horrible skin situation. What am I going to do?" Or I got these headaches, these migraine headaches, and they start giving you drugs. Nothing works. Work goes on for maybe years. Nothing works. But meanwhile, they're getting more side effects from the drugs themselves. Then eventually someone says to them something like, is your water fluoridated? Oh, I don't know. Then they find out, yes, it is fluoridated. Then they stop drinking the water, and mysteriously these symptoms clear up. In some cases, not all cases, but sometimes. And then it turns out that they're sensitive to fluoride. Yeah, I think we've finished now. We've got any more? Yes.
Doc, have you ever had occasion to research there's a conspiracy theory, internet theory out there that the Nazis fluoridated the water. I mean, have you ever had occasion to research
Yeah,
it?
it makes me puke. I do wish that people would not do this. There were a lot of good people, a lot of scientists who worked very, very hard to stop fluoridation in this country. People like George Walbot, a world-famous allergist, Fred Exner, really substantial people. But the whole thing got messed up because what's the name? Not the Ku Klux Klan, I think they were...
The John Birch Society.
John Birch Society, that's right. And all of a sudden it was a
communist plot.
It was a
to dump down
communist
population.
conspiracy, and my God, we're still trying.
Well, it does lower IQ, that you have established.
We're still trying to get away from that. Now, as far as the science is concerned, we have them on the ropes, right? They can't demonstrate that it works. They can't explain all these health effects, etc. They would love us to get involved now with the conspiracy theory. They'd jump all over it. They would love it. I sometimes think that they probably have trolls and people deliberately trying to persuade us that it is a conspiracy theory.
That's a conspiracy theory in and of itself, Dr.
Yeah. No.
Now we're doubling down.
Now, to be fair, my wife and I looked into this very carefully. We actually went to the trouble of checking the visas though.
Working with the Fluoride Action Network, we had tons of requests to say, we should be saying that the Nazis and the Russians used this in World War II camps. And I spent over 100 hours trying to nail this down. I had no idea if this was true or not. And at the end of it all, I could not find anything to substantiate it to the point that we could agree with that statement. And everything that I had, if it was taken to a court of law, would be thrown out in a matter of minutes. So there was nothing substantial to say this. We know that the Germans documented mostly everything they did during this horrible period of history. And there's none of that to be found in this history. So we do not stand by this in any way, shape, or form because we have nothing to substantiate it to what we would need to know.
They weren't embarrassed to talk about their experiments. They did dreadful things with those experiments. And they wouldn't have been embarrassed if they had really got a system which lowered, just did all the things. They would have been very happy to talk about it. As I said, we did actually check with the Wiesenthal Foundation, the guys that tracked down the Nazi war criminals, and they couldn't find anything. They couldn't find anything. But the other thing is this. You have to be very, very careful. This is so removed from the average dentist. The average dentist is very proud of this practice. They're true believers in this. And if we go out there and talk about the people are trying to dumb down the American public, or they're trying to dumb down the American people and all those things, and talk about the Nazis, it is it's going to make them very angry, very upset. It's going to be totally counterproductive. They won't entertain this issue anyway, but if you throw into them the notion that this might be, sorry, I'm very tired. Very tired. Yeah, very tired. So I say keep away from it. Don't let's continue. The science is on our side. We can end this. We can end this.
Dr. Connett, just a quick question. When we start advocating for this and go to dentists to get them to come on our side, is it accurate to be saying to them, because right now I don't even let my kids have fluoride treatments,
Yeah.
but is it accurate for us to say to them, look, we don't have a problem with topical treatments. That's not what we're talking about. But I want to make sure that we really are okay with topical treatments, because I don't know where I am yet with topical treatments.
I have to be honest with you. If you said to me, is it better to stop fluoridation and use topical treatments, using topical treatments for fluoride? My response is, I would much prefer people to use topical treatments than to have it in the drinking water. So it's no clear in my mind, it's very clear. So that's better. But now, if you ask me, do I want to use fluoridated toothpaste? No, I haven't used fluoridated toothpaste for 18 years. And I think if you look at the Scottish data, well, of course the Scottish data is saying it's okay to use topical treatments. I think the evidence is we need healthy food. Yeah, healthy food, diet.
Sleep.
I know, we kept him up really late last
running out
night.
of steam here. I'm exhausted. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. They answered my question.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it, and I wouldn't recommend. My daughters, when I took them to get the fluoridated treatment, they always would get a stomach ache after. And I knew it was toxic, and sometimes they would slip it in on me, and I wasn't paying attention, and now I have it on the record, no fluoride treatment. So, I mean, I think it's a toxic material.
From a strategic point of
Strategically,
view,
I think we give it to them.
If we want to win over dentists.
And you could tell them they're gonna make more money, because there'll be more people coming into their office paying $50 to $75 to get a fluoridation treatment. I think it's a boon for their business, and it's a good thing for our economy in Connecticut. It's gonna create more jobs.
Very well said.
Bam.
Maybe.
Let's talk about the money. Let's do it.
The dental, the I'm sorry.
He's burned out.
Let's let him take a break before.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Break
thank you
before we
very
go
much
to see the legislators.
for the presentation,
We
Doc.
need to gas
Very
them
much
up.
appreciated.
Thank you.